Kahve, the way the Turks refer to coffee, was the favorite drink of the rulers of the Ottoman Empire. But perhaps they could not have imagined that one day kahve might contribute to the downfall of this empire. But how did it all begin? Like humans, the origin of coffee is believed to be somewhere in the land of Abyssinia, which is present-day Ethiopia in East Africa. It is the legendary story of a goat herder who discovered the coffee plant by chance around the 9th century. The story goes that one afternoon, a young goat herder named Kaldi could not call his goats back. Later, when he found them, he saw that they were joyfully jumping around while eating the green leaves and red fruits of some plant. Seeing that the goats ate it without harm, Kaldi tried the fruit himself, and he became just as excited as the goats. But Kaldi could never have imagined that, 1,000 years later, coffee would lead to the formation of nations, revolutions, and even the downfall of mighty empires. In the 14th century, slave traders brought coffee from Ethiopia to the Arab region. However, it wasn't until the mid-15th century that people learned to roast coffee beans and use them to make a beverage. The center of coffee trade was the port city of Mocha, now known as Al-Mukha in Yemen. Coffee was one of the most highly favored commodities at the time, and the Ottomans quickly began exporting it to European countries. From Mocha, coffee was transported to Suez, and then carried by camel to the warehouses of Alexandria. There, French and Venetian merchants took it further. The 16th and 17th centuries marked the peak of Ottoman expansion and also witnessed the rapid rise of coffee in the empire. Coffee brought in such large revenues that the Ottomans sought every possible way to monopolize its cultivation. No coffee seeds were allowed to leave their borders unless they had been boiled or roasted to prevent germination. But they couldn't keep this control for long. In the 17th century, a Sufi cleric named Baba Budan managed to obtain 7 coffee beans and successfully cultivated them in southern India. From there, coffee spread beyond the Arab world, reaching Europe and the rest of the world. By the 17th century, the first coffee houses appeared in Europe. In 1647, the first Italian cafe was believed to have opened in Venice. In England, the first coffee houses appeared in London in 1650 and 1652. Next, cafés emerged in France, in the cities of Marseille and Paris. Coffee then entered Germany through the port of Bremen in 1673. In 1683, Vienna also had its first café after Austria defeated the Ottomans and seized 500 bags of coffee as war spoils. But now, let's return to the Ottoman Empire to see how coffee houses impacted the empire itself. The first coffee houses in human history appeared in the Ottoman Empire. Just like today, in the 16th century, coffee houses could be found everywhere in Ottoman lands. While today we drink coffee to start our day, back then, Sufi clerics used coffee to stay awake during midnight prayers. However, from being a beverage for religious purposes, coffee soon became a part of daily life. Due to the prohibition of alcohol, coffee houses became places where people from all social classes gathered, socialized, and debated politics or art. And it became so important in Arab society that, if a husband failed to provide enough coffee, his wife had the legal right to divorce him. However, not everyone welcomed this change. When coffee began to gain widespread popularity in the 16th century, it was seen as a nuisance by the authorities. Fearing that coffee houses would become gathering places for dissidents, officials in Mecca and Cairo attempted to ban the beverage. Specifically, the governor of Mecca, Khair Beg, after learning that he was being mocked in coffee houses, ordered their closure in 1511. However, these bans were ineffective and were lifted in 1524 by the order of Sultan Suleiman I. But in 1633, Sultan Murad IV issued a decree that made consuming coffee punishable by death. From then on, throughout the 18th century, many sultans tried to ban coffee houses to suppress the threat of opposition. Yet, this did not stop the proliferation of coffee houses. On the contrary, coffee spread to the farthest reaches of the Ottoman Empire. The sultans had reason to be worried. These coffee houses provided a place for people to gather, gossip, and exchange information. In reality, they became the breeding ground for later uprisings, weakening the Ottoman Empire before its eventual downfall. Among these groups were the Janissaries, the elite warriors of the Ottoman military. In coffee houses, these Janissaries plotted against the Sultan. Officials discussed conspiracies against the court. In coffee houses, Everyone could listen to ideas opposing the Ottoman government. The sultans knew this. They understood that coffee houses were a threat to their throne and attempted to suppress them. The problem was that coffee merchants were becoming wealthy, making prohibition a complicated matter. On the contrary, as nationalism spread across the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century, even more coffee houses emerged. Ethnic groups began to organize movements for independence. The leaders of these movements planned and strengthened their forces in coffee houses in Thessaloniki, Sofia, and Belgrade. With the aid of caffeine, they succeeded in establishing an independent Greek state from the Ottomans in 1821, Serbia in 1835, and Bulgaria in 1878. William Euchers, in his book All About Coffee, wrote, "Wherever coffee has been introduced, it has heralded a revolution. It is the most radical drink in the world because its effect is to make people think. And when people think, they become dangerous to tyrants." Perhaps this is why coffee has been linked to revolutionary movements, civil wars, and some of the most significant uprisings in history. And notably, no beverage has ever been banned as much as coffee. Coffee faced prohibition efforts from the moment it arrived in the Ottoman Empire. It was introduced to the Ottomans during the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Upon discovering an energizing drink called kahwa in Yemen, it was brought to Constantinople, where it was immediately embraced. However, despite the Quran making no mention of banning coffee, a cleric in Suleiman's court issued a prohibition against it, citing the prohibition of consuming anything burnt. But as we know, that did not stop coffee from thriving there. In England, King Charles II feared political discussions in coffee houses, haunted by the execution of his father, Charles I. On June 12, 1672, Charles II issued a proclamation aimed at restraining the spreading of false news and seditious discourses concerning the government and affairs of the nation, and soon after, he ordered the closure of all coffee houses in London. However, the ban lasted only 11 days due to overwhelming public opposition. The failure of the ban ignited the very explosion of ideas that Charles II had feared. In Oxford, coffee houses were regarded as penny universities. For just a few pennies, anyone could buy a cup of coffee and engage in discussions with the brightest minds of the time. Even at this early stage, coffee houses had already begun to cater to specific clientele. For instance, the Grecian Coffee House near Fleet Street became a meeting place for members of the Whig political party and the Royal Society. In 1777, Frederick the Great of Prussia issued a ban on coffee, supposedly to promote his love for beer, the nation's favored beverage. However, more importantly, he likely feared that coffee imports could threaten his throne. Nonetheless, the ban was lifted as soon as he died. In America, although the first coffee house appeared in Boston in 1676, Americans only began embracing coffee more seriously after the Boston Tea Party. On December 16, 1773, a group of Massachusetts colonists, disguised as Mohawk Indians, boarded 3 British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the harbor. This midnight raid was organized to protest the Tea Act of 1773, imposed by the British Parliament. As a result, tea lost its dominance to coffee and alcohol. The Green Dragon Tavern in Boston became known as the headquarters of the Revolution, hosting many meetings of the revolutionary group Sons of Liberty before and during the American Revolution. In New York, the Merchants Coffee House became a gathering place for those seeking to break free from the rule of King George III of Britain. And in France, the coffee houses of Paris became favorite meeting spots for revolutionary organizations and Republican insurgents during the French Revolution. For example, Café de Foy played a crucial role in calls to arms during the storming of the Bastille, a pivotal event in the French Revolution. Throughout history, coffee has been a catalyst for groundbreaking ideas and has continuously inspired new waves of thought. A good cup of coffee can make a new day feel full of excitement. However, the history of coffee is marked by conflicts, struggles, and prohibitions. Coffee houses became places where people conspired to start revolutions. As Mark Pendergrast, author of Uncommon Grounds, said, "The French and American revolutions were planned in coffee houses." But why were these revolutions primarily driven by coffee houses? There may have been revolutions sparked in taverns as well, but if you were planning a coup in a tavern, chances are you wouldn't remember anything after leaving. Or worse, you might end up in a physical altercation with your own allies. And you? What topics do you discuss when you go to a coffee house? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss any future videos. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next video.